AITA for ending an 8-year friendship after my cameras recorded her in my home when I was out of town. It all started out so naturally. She was my client first, someone who would come to my salon, sit in my chair, and chat about life while I worked on her hair. Over time, our conversations became less about small talk and more about real life. We discovered that we lived only 6 blocks apart, and our casual client-stylist relationship quickly blossomed into what seemed like an easy and natural friendship. She would drop by several times a week, sometimes even unannounced, but I never minded too much in the beginning. We shared a love for crafts, always working on something creative, and we both adored plants. My backyard became our sanctuary. We spent countless evenings there, tending to my garden, rearranging flower beds, or just sitting by the fire pit with drinks in hand, talking for hours. But there was always something about her life that felt chaotic. Drama followed her like a shadow, most of it self-inflicted. She bounced from one relationship crisis to another, always calling, always needing to vent, always looking for advice she would never take. It was draining. At first, I told myself that's just who she was. Some people need more support, and I was willing to be that friend for her. But after years of the same repetitive cycles, her rushing into relationships, making impulsive decisions, then coming to me in tears when it all predictably blew up, I started to feel suffocated. I tried setting boundaries. I gradually limited our time together, started taking longer to reply to her texts, declining her offers to come over as often. But it was hard. I knew she didn't have many other friends. I felt guilty, but I also knew that I couldn't keep sacrificing my own peace just to be her emotional dumping ground. Then everything changed. I had planned a trip out of town to visit my daughter at college, something I was really looking forward to. Before I left, I finally got around to installing a security system I had ordered a while back. It wasn't something I thought much about, just a standard precaution, really. I didn't even think to mention it to anyone. It was just something I did for peace of mind. A few days into my trip, I was sitting with my daughter, catching up on everything. At one point, I brought up the new cameras and decided to show her how she could access them from her phone. She loved the idea of being able to check in on our cats while I was away. So we opened the app, scrolled through the motion-triggered clips from earlier that day, and that's when I saw it. There, in my house, was my so-called friend. It was nighttime, so the house was dark, but the camera's motion lights illuminated her unmistakable figure. She was walking through my home, the flashlight on her phone guiding her as she peered into drawers, opened cabinets, and rummaged through my things. My daughter and I stared at the screen, stunned. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no reason for her to be there. None. And yet, there she was, creeping through my house like an intruder. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I grabbed my phone and immediately sent her a message. "Were you at my house today?" Her response was quick, casual. She said she had been in the backyard, collecting sticks for a fire pit she was planning to use at her house. I asked again, pressing her, "Were you inside my house?" There was a pause. Then she said she had to step into my garage to look for a container. Something inside me snapped. I told her that I had installed security cameras, and there was another pause before she responded with a laugh. She brushed it off, acting like I was overreacting, saying that, of course, I must have seen her outside if I had cameras. She had no idea I had cameras inside the house too. I sent her a screenshot of the footage. Then I asked her, point blank, if she knew who that person was in my home, walking around with a flashlight. Silence. A few minutes passed before she finally replied, suddenly scrambling for an excuse. "Oh yeah, your cat got out." My cat? I asked her how my cat could have possibly gotten out if no one was supposed to be inside in the first place. Her story changed again. "I'm so sorry, I forgot. I was looking for some gel pens because I needed to do artwork." Gel pens? I reminded her that she had literally just bought a massive pack of them the previous week. I could feel my hands shaking with anger. None of it made sense, and she kept backpedaling, throwing out weak excuses like she was grasping at straws. Eventually, when she saw that I wasn't buying her nonsense, she switched tactics. She became remorseful, suddenly playing the victim. She told me she had been upset about her boyfriend, that she was just trying to distract herself. I wasn't having it. I told her point blank that this was unacceptable, that she had violated my trust in a way that I couldn't ignore. I reminded her that I had spent years trying to help her understand boundaries, and I was done. I couldn't be her friend anymore. It was too much. I blocked her. But it didn't end there. A couple of days later, I was talking to my basement renter, just casually bringing up the situation, and his response floored me. He said she was at my house all the time when I was out of town. He had assumed I knew, that maybe I had asked her to check on things. I felt sick. How long had this been going on? How many times had she crept through my house while I wasn't home, poking through my things, violating my space? 2 weeks later, she texted me like nothing had happened. She needed relationship advice, of course, because her life was still a mess, and apparently, she thought we were still so close that this shouldn't be a big deal. I lost it. I told her that my renter had seen her coming into my house multiple times while I was away. I told her I knew this wasn't just a one-time lapse in judgment. She was furious. Not apologetic, furious. She said I had no right to tell anyone about it, that it was nobody's business but ours. I told her that was the final straw. I didn't want her in my life anymore. I told her I was cutting ties with toxic people and that she needed to leave me alone. After that, I told one of my other friends about what happened. Their response was unexpected. They made me feel guilty, said that people make mistakes and deserve second chances, that I should have had a conversation with her instead of cutting her off completely. But I can't bring myself to care. She had already exhausted me long before this happened. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to truly understand why what she did was so wrong. She didn't apologize because she felt guilty. She apologized because she got caught. And honestly, I don't think I'm the bad guy here. P.S. She never had a key. I just hadn't been diligent about locking my back garage door. Lesson learned. Update 1. A few weeks had passed since I had blocked her. The silence was a relief, a weight lifted off my chest that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. I thought I was finally free of her presence, free of the endless emotional drain, the creeping unease, the constant cycle of chaos she carried with her like a storm cloud. My life felt quieter. More peaceful. For the first time in what felt like years, my home was my own again. There was no more pacing around my house, dreading the sound of an unexpected knock on my door. No more anxious glances at my phone, bracing myself for yet another frantic message about some crisis she had manufactured for herself. No more feeling obligated to listen, to soothe, to fix. I had reclaimed my time, my space, my sanity. She was gone. Or at least, I thought she was. Then, one evening, purely by accident, I opened the security app. I hadn't been checking it much lately, there hadn't been a need. It had become more of a novelty than anything else, something I used to glance at my cats when I was out of town, a small reassurance that everything at home was as it should be. But as soon as the screen loaded, I felt something shift. Something subtle, yet deeply unsettling. The footage log was nearly empty. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of glitch. The system had been working fine before. Maybe there was an issue with the connection, or maybe the app had updated and reset something. But the more I scrolled, the more I realized that this wasn't a simple malfunction. Even if I hadn't been home much, my cats should have triggered the motion detectors at least a few times throughout the day. The cameras should have picked up their usual movements, their lazy stretches in the sun, their late-night prowling, their usual antics. But there was nothing. No recordings. No activity. I checked the settings, trying to make sense of it. And then I saw it. The cameras hadn't stopped working. They had been turned off. Manually. A cold, creeping dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't a technical issue. Someone had been inside my house. Not just sneaking in, not just lurking, but deliberately shutting down the cameras, ensuring that I wouldn't be able to see what they were doing. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands gripping my phone so tightly that my fingers ached. My mind raced through possibilities, but deep down, I already knew. I had no proof, not yet, but the feeling was undeniable. I knew who it was. There was no reason for her to still be coming around, no reason for her to have any access to my home. I had cut her off completely. And yet, the sensation of her presence was suffocating, a ghost that refused to be exorcised. There was a sickening familiarity to it. That same feeling I had before, when I first saw her creeping through my house on the security footage, when I confronted her and she laughed it off like it was nothing. She had no fear then. She had no shame. And now, it seemed, she still didn't. I refused to let this go unanswered. The security system was compromised, but that didn't mean I had to be powerless. I ordered another camera, one that was completely separate from the main system. It was small, discreet, the kind of thing that could be hidden in plain sight. It wouldn't show up in the app. It wouldn't be something she could disable. I placed it carefully, tucking it away in a spot she wouldn't think to check. The angle was perfect, giving me a clear view of the living room, the kitchen, the heart of my home. The place where she had once sat and laughed, where she had once pretended to be my friend. Now, it was a trap. And then, I waited. It didn't take long. A few days later, I got the notification. Motion detected. My heart pounded as I opened the feed, a terrible mix of fear and rage flooding my veins. And there she was. She wasn't sneaking, wasn't hesitating, wasn't behaving like someone who knew she was violating the most basic boundaries of human decency. She moved through my house with ease, with familiarity, like she had done it 100 times before. Like she had never stopped. She opened the fridge, her movements casual, comfortable, as if she had every right to be there. She reached inside, pulling out a drink, twisting off the cap, taking a long sip like it was her own. Then she turned, walked to the coffee maker, grabbed my cup, the same cup I used every single morning, and lifted it to her lips without a second thought. I felt sick. She wasn't in a rush. She wasn't anxious, wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't afraid. And then I watched as she reached up to one of the security cameras, her fingers wrapping around it with practiced ease. She unscrewed it from its mount, tilting it slightly as if to inspect it, then slipped it into her backpack. My blood ran cold. She knew. She knew the cameras were there. She had known all along. And yet, she kept coming back. She wasn't just trespassing. She wasn't just going through my things. She was methodically erasing her presence, making sure that I wouldn't see, making sure that I wouldn't know. But she had missed one. The rage that coursed through me was sharp, hot, blinding. This wasn't some accident. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This was calculated. Deliberate. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I realized something that shook me to my core. She wasn't afraid of getting caught. She never had been. Update 2. By morning, I had made up my mind. Every lock in the house had to go. The doors, the windows, even the locks on the detached garage, every single one had to be replaced. I couldn't live like this, knowing that she had found a way in before and could do it again. The locksmith arrived later that afternoon. A gruff, middle-aged man with calloused hands and a quiet efficiency, he got to work quickly, removing the old locks one by one. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him work, still feeling the ghost of her presence in my home. Then he stopped. He held up the old lock he had just removed from the front door, turning it over in his hands with a slight frown before glancing at me. His voice was calm, almost casual, when he spoke. Did I know that this key wasn't the original? That someone had made a copy? I felt my stomach drop, a deep, lurching sensation like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My skin prickled, cold despite the warmth of the room. She hadn't just been slipping in through an unlocked door. She hadn't just gotten lucky. She had a key. The thought made my skin crawl. The quiet, suffocating terror of knowing that at some point, when I wasn't paying attention, she had made herself a way in. She had planned this. This wasn't just opportunistic trespassing, this was deliberate. Intentional. My mind raced, trying to piece together when it could have happened. I retraced every memory, every moment we had spent in my house together. And then I remembered. She used to wander into my kitchen without asking. It had been such a small thing at the time, an annoying habit but nothing I thought twice about. She would grab a handful of cookies from the jar, pour herself a cup of tea, hum to herself as she leaned against the counter like she belonged there. It had irritated me, but I never said anything because it felt so minor in the grand scheme of all the other exhausting things about her. But there was one time in particular, that suddenly stood out with a sharp, unsettling clarity. I had left my keys on the kitchen table. It wasn't something I did often, but I remembered that day because I had been rushing around, distracted. She had been there, as always, moving through my house with the easy familiarity that had worn down my patience over time. She had wandered into the kitchen, like she always did. I had barely noticed. I could picture it now, her fingers brushing over the cool metal of my keys, her glancing over her shoulder to make sure I wasn't looking. She wouldn't have needed more than a minute. Just enough time to press my house key into a mold, a quick impression that she could take to any locksmith and have a duplicate made. I felt nauseous. This explained everything. She had never been sneaking through an unlocked door. She had never been slipping in when I forgot to secure the back entrance. She had walked in because she had a key, because she had given herself unrestricted access to my home, because she had decided that my space, my privacy, my security, didn't matter. I had spent weeks trying to understand why she wasn't afraid of getting caught. Now I knew. She wasn't afraid because she had never needed to be. She had always known that no matter how many times I told her to stay away, she could still come back. I stood there, staring at the old lock in the locksmith's hands, my breath coming fast and shallow. The walls of my own home felt smaller, suffocating, tainted by the knowledge that she had been coming and going as she pleased, that she had been walking through my life like a shadow I couldn't shake. I had underestimated her. This wasn't just about obsession. This wasn't just about refusing to let go of our friendship. This was control. This was possession. This was something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And I had no idea how far she was willing to go. Update 3. After all the discoveries, the cameras, the duplicate key, her regular intrusions, I was sure that it was only a matter of time before something worse happened. The trespassing alone was bad enough, but I kept circling the same unsettling question, why? What was the point of it all? If it had been simple theft, it would have made sense. A violation, yes, but at least a logical one. But she hadn't taken anything. There was no money missing, no valuable jewelry gone, no signs that she had been searching for anything of material worth. That was what disturbed me the most. She had access to my house, and yet she didn't use it for anything obvious. No vandalism, no destruction, no traces of malice. She had just been there. Over and over again. Drinking my coffee, sitting in my chairs, opening my fridge, walking through my space with ease, like she belonged. It wasn't just about getting in, it was about being there. That was what I couldn't shake. I expected something darker, some hidden agenda that had yet to reveal itself. I prepared for something worse. I kept my doors bolted at all times, my new locks checked twice before I went to bed. I stopped leaving my blinds open, stopped posting anything online that might give away my location or my schedule. I lived with the constant tension of waiting for the next intrusion, the next unsettling discovery that would make me feel unsafe in my own home again. And then, out of sheer frustration, I confronted her. It wasn't easy. I had blocked her. I had cut her off. The last time we spoke, I had drawn a hard line, one I never intended to cross again. But the longer I sat with the unease, the longer I felt the invisible weight of her presence even in her absence, the more I needed to hear the explanation from her own mouth. I expected lies, deflections, maybe even outrage that I had figured it all out. I expected anger or guilt or even some elaborate excuse that would paint her as the victim in all this. But I didn't expect what she actually told me. She confessed that she had never intended to steal anything. She had never wanted to hurt me or trick me or manipulate me. She had just wanted to feel like a housewife. The words sounded ridiculous at first, absurd in their simplicity. But as she explained, the absurdity twisted into something deeply unsettling. She told me that she had always dreamed of having a cozy home, of having stability, of having a space that felt safe and warm and hers. But her life had never given her that. She had spent years bouncing between apartments, living in temporary places, surrounded by temporary people. Her relationships never lasted, her friendships were fleeting, her world was constantly shifting under her feet. She had no anchor. No stability. Nothing that felt like home. And then there was my house. It was beautiful, she said. Not in a grand or extravagant way, but in the way that mattered. It was warm, lived in, cared for. It had plants that thrived under my attention, bookshelves filled with stories I had read and loved, furniture that felt welcoming rather than just functional. It smelled like coffee in the morning and firewood at night. It was a home. A real one. A place where love and care and stability existed. And she had wanted it. Not to own it, not to take it from me, but just to exist inside of it. So she had made the key. She hadn't thought of it as a crime. She hadn't seen it as a violation. To her, it had been an invitation that I hadn't explicitly given but that she had convinced herself was there nonetheless. She told herself it wasn't hurting anyone. That if I never knew, then what was the harm? She would come in when I was gone, sit in my chair, make herself a cup of coffee, water my plants, breathe in the feeling of a life that wasn't hers. For a little while, she could pretend. She could imagine that this was her home, that this was her life, that she belonged to something real and steady. I didn't know how to react. My anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was tangled now with something else, something heavier, more complicated. I had spent so much time trying to figure out what she had wanted from me, what she had been trying to take, what her endgame had been. And in the end, it was this. Not money. Not revenge. Not malice. Just, belonging. It was so strange. So deeply, painfully strange. And yet, a part of me understood. Not in a way that excused her actions, not in a way that made it okay, but in a way that made it real. She had crossed 1,000 lines that should never have been crossed. She had betrayed my trust in ways I would never have imagined possible. She had made my own home feel unsafe, unprotected, unfamiliar. But she hadn't done it out of spite. She had done it because, in her own broken way, she thought she was finding a home in a life that wasn't hers to live. I forgave her. Not because it was normal. Not because it was justified. But because I knew that it wasn't my house that she missed, it was the feeling of home. That didn't mean things went back to the way they were. The locks were changed. The duplicate key was destroyed. The cameras stayed up, every security measure I could think of remained in place. She could no longer come inside without an invitation, and I knew, deep in my gut, that I would never give her one again. Our friendship, if it could still be called that, was changed forever. She was someone I could never fully trust again, someone I could never let back into my life the way she had been before. But in some strange, unexpected form, she remained. Not a friend, not an enemy, but a lingering presence, a memory of something that had once been simple and had become something else entirely. She had wanted a home. And in the end, all she had done was prove to me that she had never really known what that meant.